Now it's time for a business spotlight. This is the Adelaide Project.
Hello and welcome to the Adelaide Project Business Spotlight, brought to you by podcastcity.com.au. If you are looking for a way to engage your audience with your amazing content, then you need to talk to them about producing, recording, editing, videoing, and distributing your very own podcast. Just go to podcastcity.com.au. I'm Ron Fiedler, and welcome back to the Adelaide Project Business Spotlight, a podcast and radio program showcasing the very best of people, businesses, organisations and events right here in Adelaide and South Australia. Just a warning today that on today's show, we are going to be talking about sensitive issues. We're going to be talking about abuse. So if you feel that this program is not right for you, please turn off. Or please listen to this with a support person. You may not have experienced abuse in your life, but we've all heard of it. There are many forms of abuse and neglect, and one thing for certain, none of us should ever experience abuse in our lives, especially children. Abuse can be physical, sexual, or emotional, and 39.6% of children experience domestic violence in their life. Then, as we know from reports from the media, children are also being neglected, with recent cases right here in South Australia being brought to light. But how does a child be heard? How does a child find their voice and find the help that they need to stop the abuse and seek the support they need? And how do adults deal with abuse from their childhood? Today on the podcast and radio show, we'll be speaking to an educator, counsellor and someone with a life experience of family sexual abuse, a person that helps children and adults find their voice and heal from trauma. Karen Keavy is an educator, counsellor and author who specialises in helping children and adults recover from the adverse effects of various forms of abuse and neglect. Karen is a passionate advocate for the delivery of consistent and comprehensive protection behaviour and sexual education in education settings, and has written her own program, Empower Me, designed for students in the early years. The strength-based program is a fresh, new approach to protective behaviours based on empowerment. To find out more about this very important topic, I'm pleased to welcome to the Adelaide Project Business Spotlight, Karen Keavy. Karen, welcome to the project.
Thank you so much, Ron. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to come in and talk about some of these topics. A lot of this can be very challenging for people to listen to. I understand that. But it's very, very important, I think, that we do talk about this, because it's only through awareness and education that we can make positive change. And that's all about what my business
is all about.
Yeah, essentially, that's what I'm about, creating positive change.
And that's what it's all about, positive change to help people in their lives. And Karen, child abuse is a very important topic, and most abuse is kept behind closed doors. And because, children are very easily manipulated and controlled, a lot of us wouldn't even know if a child's being abused. But when it comes to light, they need someone that they can talk to, someone that can help them recover and take back control of their lives. And this is where you come in. So, Karen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do to help?
Sure. That's a big topic, so I'll sort of chunk it into areas. I'll give you a little bit of background about me. I was in media for a long time, and then in my mid-30s, I changed careers and I ended up in education. And as an educator, I could see that there was a strong link between well-being and learning outcomes. So if a child's social and emotional needs were being met, their grades would follow, even if they were experiencing some form of trauma.
Yeah.
So I became really interested and passionate about well-being and positive psychology, and then that led me through to counselling. So I got some qualifications in counselling, and I was an educator for about 20 years, primary school, junior primary and primary trained. And in terms of my counselling, I decided to specialise in trauma and also well-being. So two opposite ends of the spectrum, I guess, in a sense.
Yeah.
But it's so important when you're working through trauma that you have strategies to support yourself and that you look after yourself. And sometimes that can take a counsellor to help you do that, to actually talk, help you through some of your memories, but also make sure that you're looking after yourself at the same time so that you don't get engulfed in the emotion associated with traumatic memory.
That's very interesting you say that, emotion. This would be very emotional. And as you said, you have to distance yourself. With children, they're very good at hiding their emotions, aren't they?
Yes and no. Again, it depends on the type of abuse. When it comes to child sexual abuse, there are certain behaviours that children will demonstrate that can be, I guess, little red flags, and educators are trained in this, so, to keep an eye out. The same with family and domestic violence. There are certain behaviours that children can display that can be, red flags. Behaviour is usually the way that you can
sort of bring it out. With the behaviour, I suppose it's what would a child who's not being abused do compared to what a child that is being abused does?
Children are all different.
It's very hard.
Children have all got their own personalities. They're all little individuals. But I guess in terms of, say, family and domestic violence, for example, and I've as an educator, I've taught a lot of children who've experienced family and domestic violence, and that can be really, really challenging. Like, so, for example, and I'm thinking of a couple of cases already where children would come to school really, really early. And they'd stay late at night, not wanting to go home.
Yeah.
So they were avoiding being home.
Yeah.
They were very withdrawn, or they would flinch if you brush past them, for example. So they were very hypervigilant and very, in terms of sensory overload, they're on guard. And so if anyone sort of brushes past them, their reaction can be overly
noticeable.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. And this goes into adulthood for them as well. I mean, if they haven't dealt with this as children, then they're going to be in certain situations that may be innocent to us, but to them it's just bringing a whole lot of trauma to the surface.
Ron, absolutely. There's just been a research done, a major study from the Queensland University, and Professor Ben Matthews has headed up this research, and it involved 8,500 Australians aged from, I think, 16 up until 65. So it was a really big sample, and the findings of that research were really, really alarming. And it actually showed a link between childhood trauma and then into adulthood, how that can manifest. So things like poverty, homelessness, mental health issues, so addictions, depression, anxiety, social isolation. So that it's without getting treatment, that the effects are overwhelming and quite profound. And someone's sense of identity, how they feel about themselves and who they are. So as a little person experiencing child sexual abuse or family domestic violence, a lot of children I've actually treated take on that responsibility.
Yes.
It's my fault that this is happening. You know what? They've only got themselves to try and understand this. So they don't have any other reference point, and their brains aren't fully developed. So the way that they understand it is, this is happening to me, I must be bad. So how can I stop it from happening? So a lot of children will hide and be quite resilient in that respect, I guess, to try and escape abuse. They also take it on board too, that it's their fault, and that's so mistaken.
I think, Karen, what I find when I do read some of these stories is that an older sibling will take the abuse to protect the younger children. Have you come across that?
I've worked with families who've experienced intrafamilial sexual abuse and siblings and twins and so forth. Family and domestic violence, certainly. I'm aware of that the older child will put themselves in front of mum or brothers and sisters, siblings. That can happen, yes.
That's very sad that, the oldest child feels that responsible, that they want to protect their family when the person probably abusing them is the one that should be protecting them. It's very, very complicated but very sad. Well, let's have a look at the abuse that there is out there. Now, there's many different types of abuse that you could go through. Can you explain some of these to our listeners?
Sure. As we were talking off air before, the main sort of abuse that most people think of is child sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Intrafamilial sexual abuse, which is sexual abuse that happens within a family unit, probably not spoken about as much as what it should be. That we don't talk about it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, because it certainly does. And it's the type of abuse, because it doesn't get talked about, it can perpetuate itself over generations.
Yes.
So that silence is essentially one of the ingredients that it needs to perpetuate over generations.
To break the cycle, yeah.
So we do need awareness around incest or intrafamilial sexual abuse, because through awareness and hearing survivor stories, people that haven't necessarily gone into their own healing, who may have experienced it, they hear, oh, that was me, or that happened to me too, or oh my goodness, that person experienced that. I didn't think that other people experienced that. So it can actually help them, or help empower them, for want of a better word, to start delving into their own experiences.
Yeah, and I think when people do realise that they're not the only one that's gone through this, it must take some weight off their shoulders to know that there are other people who have been through it,
absolutely,
have survived it, and have now become empowered to take their lives back.
Absolutely. It's not an easy journey by any stretch of the imagination, but I wanted to stress this point. It can be horrendously challenging to go through and relive memories.
Yes.
But the gold, or the positive out of that, is that you will be forging a relationship with yourself where you may, in fact, have to reparent yourself, because as you were growing up, you didn't have parents that were necessarily parenting you in the best possible ways.
Yes.
So you're going to forge a relationship with yourself that is so very important. You learn to love yourself, care for yourself, and you will get to know yourself on a much deeper level, and you will start discovering aspects of yourself that have been hidden by all that trauma. So underneath all that trauma and all that unprocessed emotion is the gold that we find.
Wow.
And that's why we do the work that we do.
Yeah.
Because it's essentially, Ron, it's all about the heart.
It's
about
exactly.
all that trauma that layers the heart, all those emotions, and the ways that we protect our hearts, thinking that, that's the best way to deal with it. When in fact, what can be useful when you're 5 or 6 in terms of self-protection is not useful at 25, 26, 36, 56, or even older.
Yes, yes.
And I don't know about you, Ron, I know you do a lot of these interviews, but when you talk to a woman or a man who has gone through child sexual abuse, whether it's, clerical abuse through the church, whether it's intrafamilial sexual abuse within the family, or, through a neighbour or whatever, and they're starting to address that abuse in their later years.
Yes.
People think, oh, why bother? She's lived a whole life, he's lived his old life, why bother?
Yeah.
It's never too late. It is never too late. And that gold that sits inside our hearts, it's waiting there to be discovered.
Yeah.
So by uncovering all this trauma and memory and all the yucky stuff, lies the gold. And we are never, ever, ever too old to do this work.
No. And I have heard of people in their 60s or 70s that have got help, and then they will go back and face their abuser, and it's like they've taken their life back, and they've changed. They've lived this sheltered life of not wanting to show emotion, not wanting to be vulnerable. And when they've done that and they've got the help that is needed for them, they're a wholly different sort of person.
Yeah.
They're happy for the first time in their lives.
Yeah, it's a sense of freedom, I think.
Yes, that's the word, freedom.
And it's so very, very important, I think, to stress that there is gold underneath all this yucky stuff that we've got to go through. There is gold. And it's little by little. We don't take all that trauma out all at once.
Yes.
It's just little steps, little steps, little steps.
And we can take that life of ours back again.
Yes.
It's great.
Absolutely. And, find your voice, speak your truth.
Yes.
There's a saying, speak even if your voice shakes.
Yes.
Speak your truth even if your voice shakes. And
yes.
I think over probably since the Me Too movement that was online several years ago, we're hearing more and more stories of women and men transgender and transsexuals who've experienced various forms of abuse, normally or usually sexual abuse, sexual assault.
Yes.
But also, domestic violence.
Yeah, that is something that is another thing that is put behind closed doors is domestic violence. And I believe it's something like 38% of children are going through this. I might be wrong with the number, but it is a very high number of children every day experiencing domestic violence. And as you said, they see that. So what do? They grow up and they repeat the cycle.
They can do, or they internalise it. So they either act it out or they internalise it, suppress it.
Yes.
And don't talk about it. And then, as we were talking about a little while ago, they layer their heart with things like defence mechanisms and various forms of protection and won't let people get close to them, for example. So I think it's important for us to remember that children can't be exposed to domestic violence and sexual abuse and neglect and all these other forms of abuse without there being an effect. There's always effects. And I guess that's why I love working so much with children, is that early intervention, if we can reach these children early enough after they've been exposed to trauma, the long-term effects for those children can be absolutely amazing, like so much better. Rather than, having all that abuse being suppressed or not seeking help and not getting any treatment and just going through life, I guess, oblivious to their own behaviour and the effects of their own behaviour on others.
Yes, definitely. We've all heard the song, the children are our future. I think sometimes it's a horrible thing to do, but sometimes you need to forget about the current generation in the sense of the older people and concentrate on the children, because they're the ones that will change the world. And that's happening now. We're seeing the world change, and it's the younger people that are changing the world, and they're going to become the new leaders, and they're going to have to deal with what previous generations have done. And it's hard. It really is, because we all want the best for, our children, our young adults. But we've got to break that cycle of abuse somewhere, because it's just no good. We see it in all communities. It's not just one community. It's in ethnic communities. It's in Australian communities. It's Aboriginal communities. It's all over the place. So this is not a problem just for one type of person. It is just all over the place.
Absolutely. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I was going to talk about the face of perpetrators.
Yes.
And how varied they are. For example, and I go back to sexual abuse again, but for a long time we were told within the media that, people that sexually abuse children are old men in raincoats.
Yes, this is not the case.
Certainly, it couldn't be further from the truth. It can be children that sexually abuse other children. It can be siblings that sexually abuse other children. It can be mothers. It can be fathers, it can be grandfathers, grandmothers. They can come from all religions, all cultural backgrounds, all socioeconomic conditions as well. So the face of perpetrators is very, very diverse.
Yes. And
it's not all men.
No.
Not all men at all.
And it's not all old men. I mean, we're seeing now, as you said, siblings or people 17, 18, 19 being arrested for this. So it is all over the board. And, I do remember as a child growing up in a Catholic community, never questioned the priest, for example, never. And if someone did say something about a priest, my God, the parents would go ballistic at the child. They would hit the child and say, "How dare you speak about the priest like that?"
Absolutely.
Today it's changed. Now children are being heard more. So what are the telltale signs if a child's being abused? This is probably a hard one, or a how long's a piece of string. But are there some signs that we could think, this might need to be investigated?
Oh, my goodness. It depends on the child. It depends on the type of abuse that they're experiencing. And as I mentioned before, educators are usually, they do receive training in this to recognise, because let's face it, educators spend an enormous amount of time with children. And when most abuse first starts, it's usually around the age of 4 and 5.
Yeah.
So educators in the early years are especially important. And sometimes if a child doesn't disclose abuse, educators play such an important role for those children because they provide stability, they provide care. They're beacons, I guess.
Yeah.
I speak glowingly of educators. Obviously, I was one,
yes.
so I'm a bit biased. But they're doing such a great job, educators. It's a challenging area of work to be in now, to be an educator, because of the amount of trauma that we're seeing.
I mean, I know when I was growing up, I had some teachers that I just shined to because they were so not just caring, but they were so encouraging of me to do certain things in life.
Yes.
And I look back now and think, I did treat those teachers badly at times, but they always believed in me. They never gave up on me. That was the thing. I think that's what children do like about educators, is that I think you need to be a special person to be a teacher, and you need to be that person that just doesn't give up on a child. And I think children see that no matter what do I got to do to really upset this person, because they just won't give up on me.
I think that's one of their superpowers too, is that they can look at a child and see potential.
Yes.
And they can encourage that in children. And the children don't forget that.
No, they don't. I went back to my school and apologised to Mrs. Chalmers for the way I treated her. And she said, Ron, I knew you'd do something in your life, because at that point I was a chef and I went overseas to the Middle East and worked with the coalition forces, and I did something.
Oh, my goodness.
And she said, you just needed that push all the time. And I did, and I've always thanked her for that. And I've seen her a couple of times, and I always say to her, thank you for what you did.
That's such a lovely thing to do. And I was at a school a couple of months back, and I was talking to the receptionist, and a young lad walked in, and he was about, 23, 24, and he had a friend with him. And he came up to the reception area, and he asked the receptionist if he could speak to a particular teacher. And she said, oh, can I get a message through to her about what it's regarding? And he said, oh, it's such and such. She taught me in year 7. Yeah. And what he'd done is he'd in his lunch break, he'd come back to the school and he wanted to just say hi to his teacher and thank her for everything that she did. So educators have a really, really profound effect on children.
They do.
Their influence is enormous. And I guess even more so when a child has experienced or is experiencing trauma as they're growing up.
Yes, and the other thing too, as you said, is stability. They know when they go to school, one, they won't be hurt. Secondly, that they have someone there that actually cares for them. They're getting proper shelter. And many times, I know this, that teachers buy food for children because they're not eating correctly at home. So, there's a lot that the school environment does to protect children. But if someone is being abused, a teacher or anyone who sees this, what should we do? How do we approach it? Is it just a matter of ringing someone, or it's a very sensitive issue?
It is. And some people think, oh, I don't want to get involved. This is going to come back on me. I'm going to get into trouble, or the parents or whoever is going to find out, and they're going to come back and be angry with me.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of fear around mandatory notifications. I guess first and foremost, reporting is really, really essential. And there's a number of professions where it's actually a legal requirement.
So we do have Mandarin reporting here in South Australia, for example?
Absolutely, we do. And as an educator and counsellor, for example, I'm legally required to report suspected abuse. So I don't have to have evidence of it, just suspect it. And if I was going to make a report on a child, I would get as many details as I can and write them down. So the name of the child, the age, the address, the parents' names if you know them. So as much information as you can, write it down, and then any incidents or whatever information you can that makes you suspect that abuse is happening, and then ring the CAL, Child Abuse Report Line. And you can either ring them or you can do it online.
Gotcha, yeah.
So usually online reports are much quicker.
Yeah.
And they will then, the Department of Child Protection will follow that up.
So we should always be doing that. We shouldn't be taking this into our own hands and questioning parents or whoever we suspect is doing this.
I would strongly suggest no.
Right.
No, go through the correct channels.
Yeah.
That's usually the best way to do it.
I think you're 100% right there. The last thing you want to do is to inflame a situation and make it even worse. And, of course, these people from Child Protection have been trained to approach this situation in a certain way.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, Ron, it's about the child.
Yes.
It's about the well-being and safety and protection of that child. So even though we might feel really angry or outraged or a whole host of emotions, but at the end of the day, it's about the child.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that that child is as protected and is as safe as the child possibly can be.
Yeah. And also, we've got to realise that the child may feel guilty that this person who has abused them is being talked to or maybe even arrested. They also feel a sense of responsibility in the sense that, we've got the Stockholm syndrome as well, where, children, it becomes normalised for them and they can't see the problem sometimes. So it is a very delicate subject that you've got to deal with. And this is where you come in, though. And once that has happened and the child reporting has been done, maybe the child has been placed in another family member's home, or maybe the perpetrator has gone, they need to deal with this. They need to put their life back on track. What sort of things or tips do you give children? I know it's very hard to do in such a short amount of time, but how would you deal with a child if you were counselling them? Is it just a matter of talking? Is it a matter of getting to know them? Do they do drawings? What sort of things can you do?
First and foremost, it's all about the relationship. So it's about gaining the trust of the child, and that can take time depending on what's happened and the issues at hand. But forming a relationship with that child that's based on trust. It's not all about talk therapy. I do a lot of art therapy with children and with adults.
Yeah.
And as we know now, through all the research that's been done on trauma is an internal event. So it's about what lives inside your body. So it's about the nervous system. So lots of sensory work. So depending on how the child is progressing, we'll recommend and refer the child to an OT to get some sensory work done.
Yes.
It's a bit difficult to
It is. But basically it's assessing the child to see maybe what support you can give them. So it might not be just yourself. It might be a team of people that are involved in this.
Absolutely. And that goes for adults as well, adult survivors. For example, I recommend things like yoga, Qigong, Tai Chi, because it's about body memories.
Yes.
So it's not only about what we're thinking and memories that, are being recycled in our minds, but it's about the body as well and about body memory and where that can manifest itself.
So let's just look at that for a second, adult survivors. With an adult survivor and they're in a marriage, for example, a husband who may not know that their wife was abused, whether it be sexually, emotionally, physically, they might surprise their wife or touch him in a certain way which makes them flinch or makes them and brings back memories. It is really essential for the husband to understand that the wife has gone through so much and that this is not on them. It's not their fault that this has happened, but they can help them by going to a therapy session, for example, and understanding how that person feels. It's not about you. It's about the person who's gone through that trauma and how they can deal with it and your support with it.
Absolutely. That's a really, really important point that you've raised. Living with a survivor of child sexual abuse can be tricky, and depending on a couple of factors, but it's not uncommon for survivors to dissociate often, depending on the severity of what happened and how long and how complex the background is.
Yes.
So when survivors dissociate and split, essentially, and that's a survival mechanism that they learned very, very young. Boundaries, when someone's dissociated, are going to be very different to when someone's in the here and now. So what acceptable behaviour for a survivor when they're dissociated will be completely different when that survivor is present and here in the present moment.
Yes.
So they will accept forms of behaviour that are very different to when they're in the here and now. I hope I'm explaining that.
Yeah. So I can understand what you're saying there. It comes down to that they've got to protect themselves from those memories. And what they're doing is, what we would do now is sort of fight and flight, where when it goes into the future and it's not happening now, we have different ways that we deal with it. I can totally understand how that would work.
It's very complicated.
Yeah.
And probably a little bit too complex for our conversation now.
Yes.
But dissociation is so common.
Yeah.
And even with COVID, for example, people were dissociating because of the trauma and the shock and the fear around COVID.
That's very true. There's a lot of, especially young people, and the older generation don't understand this, that they're saying how these kids, what have they got to worry about? But the social networks they had at school, the way that they associate with people now is completely different to my generation and my father's generation.
It's tricky, Ron.
It is. Yeah. And this was a major trauma where someone like me growing up thought it was the best thing that I didn't have to deal with people. But children don't see it that way.
Our children, this generation of children, are very overloaded.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that they have to deal with that we didn't have to deal with as children.
Yes.
Technology is wonderful, but there's also a downside to it. So things like online bullying.
Yeah.
When you and I, sorry, I'm a little bit older than you, but
not by much.
When we were growing up, bullying used to be experienced at school, and then you would come home.
Exactly.
And you would have some respite.
Yes.
Now, with online trolling and the way in which children can be targeted is really horrific. It's 24/7.
And the worst part about it is they can go back to their phones and see that trauma there forever. Where when it's out in the playground and it's gone, the next day we move on and we don't see what we saw the next day, but it's always there for these kids.
Absolutely. It involved the people that were there at the time.
Yeah.
Whereas for these kids, it's out there. Everyone can access that.
Yeah. Yes.
Luckily, there's organisations. You can contact them and you can...
Oh, yes. We got the cyberbullying ombudsman, I think it is, or something that you can contact, and we'll look up for that and put it in the show notes. But there is someone that actually can help, and you can report this to and can give you advice and help you along the way. Yes.
Absolutely. Very important. I was watching something on SBS a couple of weeks ago about this, and one young girl who shared a naked image of herself with her boyfriend at the time. They split up. So what he did is decided to share through spite, decided to share that image with a lot of mates.
Yes.
And then it's out there.
It's there forever.
It's public access.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad, and I'm not taking light of this, Karen, but I'm so glad when I was growing up it was disposable cameras, or we had to get the shots done at a photo shop because they didn't go viral. But now it's there, and we see this with, unfortunately, children that have been abused and pictures taken that they may come across their own picture of when they were a child, and that trauma must be absolutely horrific for them.
And another thing that we were talking about off air, Ron, was the availability of online pornography now for children.
You can't escape it. You can put innocent words in and up will come porn.
And the research that I've seen recently, the average age of a child first viewing online pornography is 8.
Wow.
If you Google it, I think it comes up at 11, but there's been recent research saying it's about 8. So again, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, children can't experience these things without there being consequences.
Yes.
So what we're seeing in the research is that a lot of children who view online pornography will reenact that abuse that they're seeing.
Yes.
And that will happen with siblings,
yeah,
with classmates. So education is so important, education in schools, to allow conversations to be had about what children are experiencing,
yes,
things that they're exposed to, how to deal with that,
yes,
support, where to go to for support, importantly, and also the long-term effects.
Yes, but this is something that hasn't really been sort of experienced yet, has it? The long-term effects on because this is all probably the last 10 years that we've had this. So there's a lot in future generations that will have to be dealt with.
Well, just recently, we're both aware of how the government is going to put a ban on vaping in schools, which is a good thing. However, I would suggest, why are we not asking why? Why are these kids having these addictions so early?
Yes. I mean, I do know that people smoked when I was going to high school, but it wasn't in big amount at high school. But today, as you know, 8, 9, 10-year-olds are getting onto these vapes. And why is it? Why is that? My biggest thing of going home was to play with my cars or build a dam down near the creek. But today these kids are, that's how I got my energy out. That's how I got my bad moods out. But today it's things like vapes. It's
different world, completely different world that these children live in. And I guess that's why I'm so passionate about education. Is one of the fundamental things we can teach our children is how to sit with uncomfortable emotions.
Yes.
How to deal with those emotions and how to release them. Mm-hmm. And, even little things like being aware of their thinking.
Yes.
And that not every thought that they have is true.
Yeah.
We've got to be discerning about our thoughts.
Mm. Karen, do you think that mindfulness meditation should be taught in schools?
Oh, absolutely.
Because this is coming up to a very big thing now. People think of meditation as a Tibetan or Buddhist thing, but it's changed now. It's not that. But I think that's the thing. Kids are not getting time out at school or time out at home to be able to be mindful, to be the well-being, to be, the meditation of taking time out to think with your thoughts.
And stillness.
Stillness, yes.
Absolute stillness.
Yes.
And that benefits everyone, irrespective of whether they've experienced trauma or not. Most people have experienced trauma in one form or another.
Yes.
But it's such a wonderful practice, and it is challenging because most people have got really busy heads and lots of whirling thoughts. But
that's why we need it. We need that.
Precisely.
That I do know some of companies that do have 10 or 15 minutes every 3 hours. They'll stop.
Great idea.
And they'll all, no phones, no nothing, just sit there, breathe, breathing exercise, and just replenish for the next part of the day. And this should be, in schools, this may be a subject that they should introduce.
I know. I was teaching in Catholic schools for quite a while, and I think it was at 11 o'clock, one particular school that I taught at, everyone would be silent. So from the front desk at reception through to the principal, through the classrooms. 11 o'clock, there was, I think it was 15 or 20 minutes of complete silence.
Yeah.
And that was a time of reflection and going inward.
And it's also, if you have this for children at school, it's also a way of them knowing for the next 20 minutes, I'm not going to be bullied. I'm not going to have to deal with that. I can sit here and know that I'm safe. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful thing, and I think we need more of it.
It's a really wonderful practice, and irrespective of your age or your background, whether you've got, whether you're on the spectrum or whether you're just someone who has problems focusing, or whether you've been diagnosed with ADHD, it benefits everyone. It's a universal
and there's
concept
and there's many different
everyone.
ways of doing it. It's not just sitting there. There's many different ways. Karen, look, let's have a look at something a little bit more positive, and that's you've written a children's book called Angel that was launched back in 2019 by the former Attorney General, the Honourable Vicky Chapman. Tell us a little bit more about this book and how it helps children.
The book I wrote in 2018. It was launched in 2019 by Vicky Chapman, who kindly helped me out by launching that book. It's a children's picture book, and it's about a little girl's story of intrafamilial sexual abuse. So it's sort of loosely based on my own background.
Yeah.
In that book, it's about a little girl being sexually abused by her grandfather. And little did I know at the time, I didn't realise the impact it would have on adult survivors.
Okay, right.
It actually helps them, by reading that book, it helps them relive some of their own memories.
Right.
And it also helps children who may have experienced intrafamilial sexual abuse, and by reading that with a practitioner who's skilled in trauma, helping them sort of come forward with their own stories.
Wow, yeah, that's so powerful that, you think it's a children's book, it's for children to understand this or get through something or know about this could happen, but adults are seeing it and going, I suppose, in a way, maybe going back to their childhood and reliving things that may be disturbing for them, but may be helpful, as you said, to get it out there and reclaim their lives.
I guess one thing that I did in the book was I described what happens when a child is being, some of the physical symptoms that happen to a child when they feel as though they're about to be abused, and, like the tummy scrunches up and, all those warning signs that our body gives us.
Yes.
As an adult survivor who may not have processed a lot of emotions, that can be very triggering.
Yes.
And as we know, as difficult as what it can be, there is a lot of healing around the trigger. So even though triggers can be extraordinarily difficult for the person to experience, there is a lot of healing within that trigger.
Mm. And yes, that's the thing. They might not realise that they needed a trigger to relive and reclaim their lives. It's such a good tool. It's such a good thing to have there to help people. And that's what it's all about. And that's what you do. You help people, Karen. You help people who have had trauma in their life. And it doesn't have to just be sexual abuse. It can be, as we said, emotional, domestic violence. And we talked about this before, self-harming now. We're harming ourselves.
Yes. That's when we talk about abuse, we don't often think about self-abuse.
Yeah.
But it's so common, whether it's eating disorders,
yeah,
whether it's the way that we think about ourselves and how we attack ourselves with critical thinking and lots of really harsh thoughts about ourselves. There's addictions.
Addictions are a big one, yes. And there's so many forms of addictions. It's not just the old alcohol and drugs. It's now gaming. It now could be things like we got cleaning disorder, what they call them, ODHD disorders. I think I've said that wrong, but we've got disorders like that. So
hoarding
is a big one.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of things that we do to ourselves that I think we're our own biggest critics. And I think that's a big problem is we always tend to look at ourselves in the bad light and not the good light. We've all got something to offer people. And that's
absolutely.
What we should be looking at.
Yeah. And that's about the gold, I think, too, Ron, that we were talking about before. As difficult as what healing trauma can be and as challenging as what it can be, it's about finding that gold in our hearts.
Yes.
And we're all, we've got that light inside of us, each and every one of us. And it's about uncovering that and feeling safe enough to show that to people.
And that's what, as I said, where you come. Karen, I want to go through some of the services that you offer and how they work. What can you do to help someone that's experienced abuse in their lives, whether they're a child or they're dealing with it as an adult?
There's a number of therapies that I'm skilled in, narrative therapy and cognitive behavioural therapy. And I could go on into the different techniques.
Yeah.
Art therapy is a big one that I use with kids, but also with adults as well. But at the end of the day, one of the most important techniques or strategies, I guess, and I touched on this earlier, is being able to sit with difficult emotions. Because, let's face it, no one likes to feel uncomfortable. No one likes to feel pain. And the immediate thing that we do is we reach externally for things to make us feel better.
Yes.
So it might be, and I'm guilty of this, overeating.
Yeah, same.
Same. Where's the chocolate? And sugar. Sugar is a big one because it alters your state so quickly.
Yes.
So whilst you may be feeling uncomfortable, got all these feelings and maybe you don't even know the name of the emotion. You just know that you feel awful.
Yeah.
So reaching for food, alcohol, drugs, shopping, online shopping.
That is a big one, yes.
Online pornography.
A lot of
name
people
it.
addicted to that now.
Yeah, so addictions are there to separate us from these emotions.
Yes, and this is where we've got to deal with these because these are not good for us.
There's always gold in the emotion is there for a reason, and there's gold underneath that emotion. If we can work through as best as we can that uncomfortable feeling, we're going to find the gold underneath it. And it might take, 2 or 3 times, it might take 10 times, might take 20 times, but underneath it all, once we keep digging, keep at it, keep loving ourselves, keep talking to ourselves in a compassionate way, and in a way filled with love. One of the big things that I learned through my own journey with trauma is about self-compassion and love.
Yes.
Talking kindly to myself, treating myself kindly, reparenting myself in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that is so important, the self-love is. With your services, Karen, are they one-on-one? Are they group sessions? How do they come to you? Do you go to them?
Thank you for asking that question. I work one-on-one with clients. Sometimes that can be in their own home. Sometimes it can be in a school setting.
Yeah.
Sometimes clients come to my own premises where I operate from. I also do school talks. I do presentations to educators, wellbeing presentations. And I've just written a new program called The Calling for educators. So
tell us more about that.
It's all about, and again, I only learned about the calling through journeying into my own heart. And I believe that particularly in some of the professions like medicine and nursing and education and police and ambulance, fire, those sorts of professions where you're helping.
Yes,
and you're being of service to others. I think that's a real calling. I think it's bigger than just us. I think it's something that we're led into. And this PD that I've just put together for educators is all about honouring that calling and how we can actually find strength in that calling through challenging times.
Yeah.
And again, it's about going back into the heart.
It's so beautiful. Karen, can you give us one thing that people should take away from our conversation today?
Only one.
It's hard. I'll give you two if you need it. But what would you like people to take away today?
I guess first and foremost, if someone has experienced trauma and is listening to our conversation and has been finding it really challenging, and certainly there are times when it's horrendously challenging, I would like to reassure them that there's light at the end of the tunnel, that they will find that gold within their hearts, and keep at it. Keep loving themselves, keep talking to themselves and acting kindly to themselves. Yeah, I guess that's what I would like people to take away.
So good. Remember, I always say to people, and my listeners know this, is there is always someone out there that can help you.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of help out there now, a lot of free help as well.
Yeah.
I know on Instagram there's a number of practitioners that have Instagram posts and sites and so forth with a lot of advice on somatic memory and body therapies that are useful with trauma. So, lots of help out there.
And I talk to a mental health person every fortnight, and the thing that they say to me all the time, and it's so important, I think, is no matter what you're going through, no matter what is happening, someone is always there to help. And there are many different ways, and you can do it online. You don't have to speak to a single person and be anonymous, or you can ring, or you can drop into some centres. There's many options, and just please Google options, Google what you're going through, because it will guide you in the right direction to find someone that can help.
That's really important, Ron. Thank you for saying that, because with trauma it can be very isolating and you can feel like you're the only one that's ever experienced this.
Yes.
But when we start sharing stories, we start listening to other people's stories, we soon realise, oh my goodness, this has affected so many people.
Yeah.
And I think you quoted some stats earlier around family and domestic violence. This study that I was talking about earlier from the University of Queensland.
Yes.
These 8,500 Australians that were involved in this study, I think it was 62% had been exposed to family and domestic violence.
Wow.
That's more than 1 in 2.
Yeah.
So they may not have necessarily, been experienced it themselves firsthand, but they've been exposed to it. So they might have grown up in that sort of environment.
Or seen it from friends or family.
Yeah, it's sad. It's really sad.
It is. But look, this is not doom and gloom.
No.
Right now is the time to take control.
Yes.
Get in contact with someone like Karen and take control back of your life. Karen, thank you so much for coming on the program today. I really believe that the conversation we've had will help a lot of people out there. If people do want to contact you to engage your services, to find out more about how you can help them, or maybe even buy a copy of your book, how can they go about doing that?
Probably, first and foremost, thank you for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been an honour to have you on. You've given us so much hope, and that's what it's about.
Thank you. In terms of getting in contact with me, probably the website is the easiest way, Karen Keavy, and I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn, Facebook. So I'm all on all those social platforms.
And we will have all those contact details in the show notes, and we'll put them on our social media as well. Karen, once again, thank you so much for coming onto the program.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Today on the LA Project Business Spotlight, we have been speaking with Karen Keavy from Infinity Wellness Education and Counselling, a person that helps people find their voice so that they can heal from the adverse effects of various forms of abuse and neglect. If you or anyone you know is experiencing any form of abuse, there is help out there for you. You can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14, the Kids Helpline on 1-800 551 800, or the South Australian Domestic Violence Helpline on 1-800 800 098. And also, if you are in immediate danger, please call 000. This podcast is brought to you by Podcast City. If you'd like more information about starting your own podcast, from planning your podcast to recording, editing, and distributing your very own podcast to the world, just go to podcastcity.com.au. I'm Ron Fiedler. Until we meet next time, bye for now.